Good afternoon or good morning. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Frank Vukovich, Director of Strategic Partnerships with FastPath, and excited to spend some time with you this afternoon talking about security and audit compliance and segregation duties inside Microsoft Dynamics 365 for finance and operations and also for Microsoft Dynamics AX. We're excited to partner with our friends at Avanico, a longtime partner of FastPath, to present today's webinar, and hopefully everyone on today's webinar will learn a little bit more about what you can do with security and audit and compliance control-wise inside Dynamics and how the FastPath solution that is available can allow you to enhance your internal control environment in those areas. We're going to do some brief introductions here before we get started. I want to first off allow one of our co-presenters and co-hosts today from Avanico, Arnold Chong, if he could introduce himself, please.
Sure. Thanks, Frank. Thanks, everyone, for joining us in this webinar. Quick intro to who I am. I am Arnold Chong. I'm the Inside Sales lead at Avanico. And as you can see, we're joined here with Frank and Alex from FastPath. They will be presenting on security management, compliance, and segregation of duties. We have a long history with our partnership with FastPath, and they will be presenting a solution that their clients are using today to enhance D365 and AX from an auditing, compliance, and security perspective. Go ahead.
Okay, excellent. And then, as I mentioned before, my name is Frank Vukovich, Director of Strategic Partnerships at FastPath. I've been working with the AX product going back to Xapta 3.0 Service Pack 1 way back in 2002. Have been a customer multiple times. Actually, was one of the founders of the AX user group and have been working with FastPath now the past 3+ years, combining my experience with the Microsoft Dynamics world with my audit experience. I still hold a certified internal auditor and certified information system auditor designation, and I'm very active in the audit community and the accounting community for that matter, keeping abreast of the latest regulations and compliance standards and working with our clients and working with many of the world's largest accounting firms that use the FastPath solutions as well. I want to have my colleague who's going to do the demo part of today's webinar introduce himself as well. Alex?
Thanks, Frank. So my name is Alex Meyer. I'm the Director of Dynamics AX and 365 for Finance and Operations Development at FastPath. And like Frank mentioned, I'll be leading the demo today. I'm basically the technical lead from the FastPath side on how we go about actually getting the security data from the ERP system and then performing the necessary security analysis from that.
Excellent. Well, welcome, Alex. Welcome, Arnold, and welcome to everyone we have online as well. Before we get started with the details about the solutions from FastPath, we did want to briefly spend some time talking about each of our companies. So, Arnold, I want you to let everyone know a little bit more about Avanico.
Sure, thanks. Before I pass it over to Frank and Alex to run it, I do want to tell you a little bit of who we are. We were formerly known as AX Mentor, but was recently rebranded as Avanico to align with Microsoft's newest initiatives to focus on D365 and not just AX. But we do support all versions of AX. Avanico was founded in 2006. We've been a Microsoft partner ever since. We have members of our team who are part of the TAP program. We were heavily involved with the user group community and on the D365 AX UG side as well as the CRM UG side. We have our headquarters in San Diego with several other offices in California, such as Temecula, Irvine, Los Angeles, and we also have an European presence in UK and Denmark, where our founders are from and where AX originated. We have experts who worked with the platform since the very beginning. Our vertical expertise is focused on manufacturing and distribution, but we do cover a wide breadth of other verticals that include but are not limited to professional services, financial services, retail, e-commerce, and the public sector. We're a full-stack partner that has services that cover 365, AX, and CRM, as well as ISV development. We can help you with general help desk services, road mapping, full implementation life cycles. After a successful implementation with us, we also provide managed support and post-live support services. We developed several add-on products for AX. Quax is our address verification / data migration tool to move and validate your data from a QA standpoint. We have a workflow app. It helps you approve workflows through an iOS service through Apple. We also have an advanced public sector module. If you have any questions throughout this webcast, please post them within the box and I will read them off. Or actually, Frank and Alex will read them off after each section of their presentation. And with that, I'll pass it over back to Frank.
Great. Thanks, Arnold. And again, FastPath is excited to again partner with Avanico, a longtime partner going back to the AX Metro days, as you mentioned. So glad to learn a bit more about your organization. Let's now spend a little bit of time, though, focusing on what FastPath's about, and then we'll quickly get to the meat of today's webinar, which is the demo and demonstration of all the great tools we have around security, audit, and compliance. Our agenda for today, a pretty simple one. There's 4 solutions from FastPath, or modules, if you will, that Alex will be presenting. We'll review each of them individually and then stop for questions and answers, as Arnold mentioned, at the end of each presentation segment. And then we'll have time at the end of the presentation as well for questions. You're welcome to submit them via the question queue inside GoToWebinar as we go through each of these. And certainly if there's any questions after the fact you think of, we'll have our contact information at the end of the presentation for you to reach out to us as well. So first off, though, briefly want to spend a little bit of time about FastPath. We are an ISV, independent software vendor, as Microsoft calls them. Been in the dynamic space and been a company since 2004. All we do is sell software. We don't offer any professional services. We just develop really good software with our team of audit and security personnel. We have CPAs, CIAs, CISAs on staff that understand the controls that you should have in place in your business software environment, and they work closely with our team of technologists like Alex and the like that understand the security side of, in this case, Dynamics 365 for finance and operations and Dynamics AX, and we meld those two together to deliver a platform of services that allows you to enhance your internal control system inside 365, inside AX. We have over 1,000 customers in 30-plus countries. We currently have customers on 6 of the 7 continents. We don't have any customers yet in Antarctica, but if there's anyone on the phone today or listening to this webinar recording that happens to be from Antarctica, we'd love to talk to you about our solution. Might be able to catch you a pretty good deal to get that 7th continent checked off the list. And from the evolution of the company starting back in 2004 around the Great Plains product, we now have reached out across multiple business software platforms. You see them listed there on your screen. We still spend a lot of our time, though, working the Microsoft Dynamics AX and Microsoft Dynamics 365 channel. And the other part that is neat as we've expanded across multiple ERP platforms is we now also have a solution that allows you to look at segregation duties and perform access reviews and the like across platforms. So if you happen to be running Dynamics 365 and Salesforce or Dynamics AX and perhaps your corporate runs SAP, the FastPath solutions are available now to work cross-platform to allow you to have one place to look at segregation duties, look at access reviews, perform access certifications. So, alrighty, so that's enough about FastPath as a company. Before I hand things over to Alex, I just want to briefly highlight again that the information we'll be touching up on today, really 4 different modules, if you will, of the FastPath solutions for 365, for finance and operations, and for Dynamics AX. 3 of the 4 are available in any version of AX. The 4th one, the Security Designer that you see on the right-hand side, is currently only available for Dynamics 365 for finance and operations. But the solutions Alex is going to show you, they look and feel and behave the same regardless of version of AX or 365 you might be running, or for that matter, even some of those other ERP platforms I talked about. Our stuff sits out in the cloud on Microsoft Azure. We have SOC reports that support that, a SOC 2 Type 1 and Type 2 report that support the internal controls FastPath as a company has to provide assurances to you from a security and privacy perspective where your data might sit when you're working with FastPath and our cloud solutions. We still have plenty of customers that run our solutions on-premise as well through our GRC Studio product, but as the market continues to evolve, and we see this a lot with Microsoft and Dynamics 365, we're investing heavily into the cloud and building out our functionality in the cloud. Every 10 weeks we have a new release that comes out. So everything Alex is going to show you today sits in Microsoft Azure, sits in the cloud. You just need to have a browser and internet connection to be able to do all these great things as far as looking at who has access to your systems, what are they doing with it, where are they vulnerable, and then the last piece there, the security designer as far as making it easier to set up and administer security inside Dynamics 365. One thing I want to point out and I'll hand things over to Alex, is that controls are important to any organization, big or small, public or private, regardless of industry. At FastPath, we work with customers across all sorts of industries. Do we have a lot of companies that are publicly traded here in the States and have SOX, SOX compliance needs? Absolutely. But we have just as many or more customers and clients that don't have those requirements, but understand it's important to have the right controls in your internal control system, regardless if you're heavily audited or not. So as we go through things today, Alex walks you through all the functionality. Keep in mind, these are additional controls to enhance your AX or 365 environment. They're not available out of the box from Microsoft. Microsoft has chosen to not have a lot of this information on their roadmap functionality-wise inside the core product, and want to have companies like FastPath provide the opportunity to extend out and add those additional controls that many, many customers require if they are heavily regulated and audited. But even for the customers that are not, those that just take controls and realize how important they are and want to stay out of the headlines from a control weakness or fraud perspective. So with that, let's go ahead and let Alex Meyer, our Director of Dynamics AX / D365 for Finance and Operations Development, take the floor and start leading you through a review of the FastPath solutions. Arnold, if you could promote Alex to presenter, and then Alex, I'll let you know when I can see your screen on my desktop. Again, I remind folks, Alex is going to pause at the end of each section or each module we cover for Q&A. Let's see if there's any questions. So, yep. Alex, I can see your screen. Arnold, can you see it?
Yep, he should be the presenter.
Excellent. All right, take it away, Alex.
All right, thanks, Frank. So like Frank mentioned, we'll be walking through the tool here today. We'll be looking specifically at the FastPath offering from a D365 for finance and operations perspective. But then again, like Frank mentioned, this tool will look exactly the same whether you're in, AX 2012, RTM, R2 or R3, or AX 2009 or AX 4. So we support all those products using the same UI front end. The FastPath tool is a SaaS-based solution. It sits outside in Microsoft Azure. It sits outside of any other ERP or CRM system we integrate with, and then we create connection points into those individual systems. Like Frank mentioned, if you guys have questions, feel free to put them into the chat box, and I'll be stopping after each module to see if there are any questions, and we can definitely get those answered as we go through. There will also be a Q&A session at the end if you guys have if you want to wait and hold your questions until then. So the FastPath environment that we're looking at here today is connected up to a test D365 Finance and Operations system. And the first screen you're going to be presented with when you log into FastPath is this dashboard screen, which is basically going to give you an overview of the product or the ERP system or systems that you're integrated with. In this case, you can see we're hooked up to a Dynamics 365 instance with 26 companies and 87 users. Then you also get a breakdown of different segregation of duties conflicts. So you can see top user conflicts by risk, our segregation duties scorecard, and these are all driven off of our segregation duties module. We'll get into that when we get into that piece of FastPath there. But the opening screen here is customizable. You can put different KPIs on it, anything that you want to bring to the forefront and actually look at when you log in. And then over here on the left-hand side, you have your modules that we offer, and they're broken out very similarly to what Frank mentioned previously. So the access reviews is showing you where users have access to your environment, how they're getting that access, both from a user and a role perspective. Segregation duties is then taking that access and saying, okay, I want to see where the conflicts of that access are based on our segregation duties rule set that we have, both from a user and a role perspective. Audit Trail then goes in and says, hey, where are users making changes with the access that they have? What changes are they making? What are the old and new value? The date and time that change occurred, and then any additional information about those changes as well. That identity manager piece where we're actually going in and doing user provisioning, user modification, and user termination with a workflow around the backside is our identity manager piece. And then the security designer piece is where we're actually developing security from within FastPath. We're actually providing you a UI within FastPath to go in and make changes to your role, duty, or privilege security, and then actually run your changes to security against that SOD or segregation duties rule set again to basically validate and say, hey, what changes to my SOD did I make along with actually changing security? And then finally, once you're satisfied with that, being able to push that security from FastPath back into D365 and actually modify the security in that way. So we'll go ahead and jump into the Assure piece and kind of work our way down, and we'll be stopping, like we mentioned, for questions along the way. So normally the first report that we show from an access review side is just a straight user access report, right? And so this is actually taking the idea that we're distilling down all of the user's role assignments and looking at that role access and then determining what objects in the system they have access to. So we have some pre-filtering that you can do for an individual. You can select an individual company or companies. You can select an individual user that you want to run this for. You can do an individual type. So these are the different object types from within D365. You have your menu items, your tables, your data entities, your service operations. In this case, we'll just select menu item display, and then you can go down to the object level if you want to. But if we go ahead and run this report like it is right now, basically it's saying I want to see, based on all the roles that the Alicia user is assigned, I want to see the objects that she has access to. So in this case, we can see this Alicia user has access to this 1099 software vendor object. We're able to see the object label and the object name or programmatic, or what you would see in the AOT. We can see the menu item display, and she has read access to this. If we go ahead and click on this row, over here on the right-hand side, we're going to be able to see the role, duty, and privilege of how the user is getting that access, right? So now we're not only seeing what objects the user has access to, but we're showing here's how this user is getting that access. So you can see that because this user is assigned the budget clerk role, that and the duties and privileges that are assigned to that budget clerk role, that's how the user is getting read access to this individual object. And if you go through and we click over here and we select a new row, you can see that the values over here are changing because we're doing a live call based on the row that you have selected. So we're showing you the pertinent information that you need to know, additional information about this particular access for this user. All the reports within FastPath can be exported to CSV, Excel, and PDF formats. We can also have reports be signed off on. So if users are supposed to come in and actually sign off on a particular report to prove to an audit team that you're actually going through and performing, doing your due diligence through your audit period, you can sign off on a report, and actually it would capture the user and the time of the report was ran and any parameters of the report itself, and that's captured in our signature log for reporting on later. And then you can schedule these reports to be sent out to any user within FastPath to be sent out on a periodic basis. So if you want this report to be delivered every Monday at 8 a.m. to a particular user, you can definitely do that, and every Monday at 8 a.m. it would go out and rerun the report and then have that be delivered out from there. So from a user access perspective, this report is great to give you a comprehensive overview of everywhere that a user has access. But when you're going through an internal, external audit, there are going to be times when you want to just report on what could be considered high risk or, what critical access within your system, because not every access within D365 is going to present the same level of risk. It's things around your master data, financials, anything that's, where more money is changing hands, those areas within AX are actually going to be more high risk than maybe other areas. And so that's where this critical access report comes in. The critical access report actually reports on what we call critical access groups. And prior to the webinar here today, I went out and set up a critical access group called Audit, and I put in a couple different objects within this audit group. I put the vendor and customer table as well as the menu items that would allow a user to actually edit or modify an address for that master record. The one thing to note here is that you can put multiple different types of objects within this group, but basically I'm deeming these objects to be critical for this critical access group. So in my use case here, I'm saying I want to know who has access to edit or modify any one of these objects. Now when I come up and run the critical access report here, I can do the same type of pre-filtering I did in the user access report, but if I run this for this critical access group, now when I actually run this report, it's going to return back and show me everywhere that a user has access to edit or modify any object within that critical access group. So now I can see here, if I scroll down just a bit, that if we use that Alicia user again that we were looking at, we can see this Alicia user actually has access to update the VIN table edit address object, right? So now we know that she can actually update vendor addresses based on the access that she's assigned. And then over here on the right-hand side, again, we're able to actually see the role duty privilege, how the user's getting that access. So we can see because she's assigned the purchasing agent role, that's how she's getting the access to this, to update vendor addresses, right? So we're looking at the same type of information we were looking at from a user access perspective, but we're distilling it down and focusing in on areas that we're going to deem to be critical from within your environment, and we can very quickly run this report. And this allows you to build that repeatable process that auditors are looking for, so you can come out and run this every audit period and say, hey, are these users the users that should have access to these high-risk areas, and do we know what access they have to those high-risk areas? So that's the critical access report. So far we've looked at everything from access from a user side. We can also do the same type of reporting from a role side, so we can come into a role access report, select an individual role from the top, and again select an object type from the drop down. If we go ahead and run this report now, basically it's going to go out and say, hey, I want to look at this from a role side and basically be able to show what access each role has. So I can see that this accountant role has access to this abatement certificate object. I'm again able to see the AOT or programmatic name as well as the label for that, and I can see this role has read access to it. So I'm able to see both. I'm able to see the access from both a user and a role perspective. And then we do have a number of dashboard reports. These reports are just run when you click on them, and they basically slice and dice information and a little bit the access information a little bit different way to give you different views of the data. Just some points that I wanted, some reports I wanted to pull out of here was that we do have licensing reports from a role and a user's perspective. So if you go ahead and run the role license report, what this is actually doing is going out and looking at the role access, basically saying based on that role access, what license type is tied to that role. So we go out and actually look at the entry point access using the same methodology that Microsoft uses to determine licensing, and basically give you that breakdown to show you the license type that's required for the role. So you can see here this accountant role is actually requiring an operations license based on the access that it has. Then over here on the right-hand side, we're actually breaking it down and showing you at each license level how many accesses to each of those entry points does this role have. So in this case, you can see it has a large number, 981 different operations entry points. So we normally see clients using this sometimes to get a quick ROI from FastPath, because you can actually use this to affect your user licensing by looking at this and saying, where can I maybe roll back security so that I no longer have, maybe I can roll back a role's access to the point where they're requiring a lower license. So the example we sometimes give is this accounts payable centralized payments clerk only has 3 activity license accesses. And so maybe it needs those accesses to perform its day-to-day operation, but maybe we could roll those back and have it actually require a team member license, and then any user that's assigning that role would only require a team member license. And so you can help use this report to see where you could maybe roll back access to actually go forward and do some, save some money from a user license perspective. So we have that report from both a role and a user's perspective. And like I mentioned, from the user side, right, it's taking all the roles that the user's assigned, looking across them and saying, okay, which license type is going to be required for this user. And so it's actually doing the operation across all the roles that each user is assigned. And then finally, we do have a user role company assignment report here, which is going to show all the user role mappings and then the legal entities that user actually is being restricted in. So, for example, you see the least user here has access to the budget clerk role. She has that access in all companies, right? So she's not being restricted for that particular access. But if we scroll down here, we can see the Benjamin user is assigned the sales manager role, and it's only assigned that access in these 4 legal entities, right? So we're very quickly able to come in and see where users are assigned their user role assignments and if they're being restricted to particular legal entities. So with that, that's kind of the end of the access review side. Frank or Arnold, did we get any questions during that time, or does anybody have any questions they'd like to put into the chat box at this time?
Yeah, Alex, and someone comment on this, but go back to the licensing piece. Traditionally, folks don't think about licensing when it comes to securing audit controls, but just to make sure everyone understands there, when you change security from an admin perspective inside Dynamics 365 or Dynamics AX, and I know they're licensed differently, that has an impact on what type of licenses you need to have and what you need to be paying Microsoft for, correct?
Yes, it does. So, based on what, licensing is always done at the user level, but, users are assigned to roles. So if you want to look at it from a roles perspective, that's normally where you would see the biggest ROI, because obviously a role can be assigned to multiple users. So you're looking at the entry points access, or basically what menu items does this role have access to, and based on the access that those roles have to the entry points will determine what license is required for that access. So when you're going in and you're changing security, you can very easily be changing the licensing that's required for a particular role, duty, or privilege without knowing it. And so you want to make sure that you're keeping that in mind when you're going through and actually, modifying your security. And we actually take that into account in the security designer that we'll look at a little bit later.
Excellent. So best practice when you're doing security updates is to add to your checklist of things, not just only testing that the security change does what you think it is, but double check what the impact might be on your licensing.
Correct, yeah, because if you change, a role that was, a team member license, and all of a sudden it's an enterprise license or operations license in D365, that's a big jump from a user license perspective, price-wise. And so every user that would be assigned to that role is now requiring that operations license.
Okay, good. Then the only other question I see, and I don't know if you see any more, please speak up. The reports you showed earlier, are they exportable?
Yeah, so every report that we run today is exportable to CSV, Excel, and PDF formats. And then you can also schedule those reports to be sent out on a periodic basis to any user of FastPath in those three formats. So you can schedule those reports to be sent out and they'd be delivered to the email of the user.
Excellent. Good deal. Okay. That's all I see question-wise.
Okay. Perfect. So we'll go ahead and jump into the segregation of duties, which ties in very closely to the access reviews, because basically the segregation of duties is taking all the information we've looked at so far and saying, okay, based on that user or role access, what type of segregation of duties conflicts do I have based on that access? And so the first place that we like to show within our segregation duties is our rule set. And this is one area where we can differentiate ourselves both from a Microsoft perspective as well as any competitors, because we do have internal auditors on staff, CIAs, and other accredited individuals on our staff that basically went through and created this rule set. And it's delivered out of the box from FastPath. So there's 96 different rules that come out of the box, and then this listing is completely customizable, right? You can take this, you can modify it, you can add conflicts, remove conflicts, but you get this out of the box rule set that's based on the ISACA principles to basically give you an industry best practice going forward. The rule set itself is based on what we call done at what we call the business process level, and the business process to FastPath is basically any combination of object access that allow you to perform a task or process. So, for example, if we look at this bank accounts and journal lines here, we go ahead and we make a business process out of maintaining bank accounts. What menu items, tables, data entity, service operations actually allow you to edit or modify a bank account, and then what tables, data entity, service operations, menu items allow you to edit or modify a journal line. And we create business processes out of each side of these conflicts. And that's where some of that audit intelligence comes in, because we map those down and create those business processes for you. And that allows us to get down to that object level when we're doing our segregation duties analysis. And so the biggest difference between that and what Microsoft does and they're out of the box is that Microsoft does their segregation duties at the duty level, and so you basically say a user shouldn't have access to duty 1 and duty 2, and so Microsoft actually shows you, hey, here are the users that are assigned that access, and then it's a preventative control where it actually won't allow you to assign a role to a user that would violate that. The FastPath tool is a detective control. Like we're not going to stop you from assigning anybody any access, but we're going to show you everywhere that a user does have that access, and we're going to allow you to actually provide mitigations around that. The other piece is that because we go down to the object level, it doesn't matter what role, duty, or privilege changes you're making from a security standpoint, because at the end of the day, we're looking and saying, what can this user actually perform? If you're looking at this from a Microsoft perspective and they're doing that at their segregation duties at the duty level, any change you make to a duty or a privilege, you have to go back through and revalidate your entire SOD model and say, hey, are these rules still valid? Because, you know, I may have changed something and either added a new conflict or removed a conflict based on the changes that I made. With the FastPath tool, you don't have to do that because we're distilling that down and looking at that object level and saying, hey, what can this user actually perform? What can this user actually do from a business process perspective? And so we're taking out a lot of the, you know, false positive and false negatives you would get from the Microsoft model by going down to that object level. And so then, like I mentioned, you do get this rule set out of the box, and you can modify any part of it. So you can modify and add or remove conflicts. You can add or modify business processes. Basically, you can make this conflict listing your own and customize it to your particular business use case. And so this is a very good spot to start if you are using this tool, because this conflict listing report is used for all of our other conflict reporting. You know, from a user and a role perspective, we use this listing as the basis to determine what is a conflict and what's not a conflict. So once you get this listing set up, obviously the next thing you're going to want to do is run user and role conflicts. And so that's exactly what these reports allow you to do, is we basically take the, in this case, we take the user access information we were looking at earlier and we run it against that rule set that we were just looking at. And we're able to very quickly generate the conflicts for each user. So if we go ahead and use that Alicia user again we've been using, and we look at the conflicts that she has in the Katoso Consulting Company, you can see very quickly we were able to turn around and say, here's where segregation duties conflict exists for this particular user. So for example here, we can see that this user has access to edit or modify the items business process and purchase order lines business process, right? So you're able to see that she's able to perform and edit both of these objects from within with the access that she has. So you have the listing itself. You can see the description here. This is basically saying why this is a conflict, or the description tied to that conflict. We have the risk level. So out of the box, all the risk level for the conflicts are going to be set to medium, and then you could go and modify them if you wanted to and set them to low, medium, and high, and actually categorize them to show, you know, what, so you can have a, you know, a working, you know, your order of operations when you're trying to go through and you want to take care of your high risk conflicts first, and then medium, and then low. So you can see the risk level tied to the conflict. Then you're able to see this conflict exists within the Katoso Consulting Company. If I go ahead and click on this row, what's actually going to happen over here on the right-hand side is we're going to go out and we're going to show you all the different role, duty, and privilege combinations that are giving the user access to this particular conflict. So in this case, we're able to see that this conflict isn't being generated by one role specifically. It's actually a cross-role conflict. It's actually the combination of the buying agent role and the purchasing agent role. The combination of those both being assigned to this Alicia user is actually causing this particular conflict. So, you know, when you run this report, there are a number of different things that you can do, right? You may say, hey, we're going to go back into D365 and actually change the user to role or role, duty, privilege assignment to actually change what this user has access to do, and it maybe remove access to one or more of the items that are causing the conflict. Or you may come back in and say, you know, we know the user has access, we know it's causing this conflict, but I have a process or mitigation a process control or mitigation that I want to put in place to actually stop the user from performing one or more of the processes, and therefore remove the segregation of duties conflict that this user has. And so that's what the status column is. The status column is the status of the user mitigation for this. So when you first run this report, they're all going to be set to new because obviously nothing's been done to mitigate those. And then as you go through and you actually mitigate the conflict, the status column will change based on the status that you set. So you know that anything marked as new has not been touched. Anything that's marked anything other than new has been touched in some way, shape, or form. So we'll open up this proposed user conflict mitigation here, and it actually open up the mitigate conflict window. And the mitigate conflict window allows you, has three different areas. The top area is going to show you the conflict itself, basically describing what conflict you're mitigating for this user. The middle area is going to show you any history of this conflict, so you're able to come in and see, hey, when was the last time this was touched, or any previous time this was touched. It'll show you a full history of that. So you're able to see the date and time, who last changed it, the status, any notes, and the process controls that they're using to mitigate this conflict. And then down here at the bottom, this is where you can actually come in and mitigate and provide an actual mitigation for this conflict. And so you have a controls area where we have a controls library that the client can set up and actually either upload or add conflicts or mitigations to that control library and actually use that to help mitigate the conflict. What that allows you to do is you can then use those controls very quickly and use multiple controls in this case to actually mitigate this conflict. So we're using our dual approvals control as well as our transaction sampling control, to mitigate this particular conflict. But you can have as many controls as you would like and use that. And basically whatever combination of those controls you need to actually mitigate this conflict, that's what you could put in there. The status column is going to be the status of that user mitigation. And so the status column, out of the box, we give you some options here, but it allows you to categorize your user mitigations to say what step in the process are they at. The other thing to note is that the status column is securable from the FastPath side. So you can have certain users of FastPath come in and actually propose user mitigations and have other users come in and actually approve those. So you can kind of do a workflow piece around user mitigations on that side. And then the mitigation notes area is basically a place where you come in, provide any notes that you'd like to put in to be tied to this conflict itself, and anything that needs to be included with that. So once you go in and you provide all that information, you can go ahead and mitigate the conflict, and the status would be updated based on that. But this allows you an area to see where user conflict exists, and you can provide a mitigation for that user conflict. So as you start going through this and you're actually mitigating this conflict, mitigating the conflicts within your environment, the next report you'll probably want to see is this conflict status report. And this report is great, especially if you have internal, external auditors, because it does two main things. One is it shows you where you have user conflicts within your environment, and two, it shows you what mitigations you're applying to that user conflict, and it shows you that all in one place. So the first four columns here are actually showing you, hey, here's where user conflict exists within the environment itself, so you can see the company, the user, the conflict name, and description. And then the last six columns are actually showing you, here's the mitigation that you're applying to this user conflict. So in one report, you get both sides of that, and you can give this to your internal, external audit team or your security team or anybody, and basically show them, we know where user conflicts are, and here's what we're doing to mitigate those conflicts. And from an auditing perspective, that's a great tool to have to be able to show them that not only do you know where conflicts are, but here's what you're doing to mitigate those conflicts. So everything we looked at so far has been from the user side for conflicts. Again, we can do the same type of reporting from a role side, where we're coming in and looking from a role perspective. And we can come in and basically run this report from the role side. So I can run this for the accountant role, basically run this report, and it's going to output all of the conflicts that are inherent to the accountant role itself. So we can see those four conflicts exist just based on the access that the accountant role has, right? So we know that if we assign the accountant role to a user, they're going to have these four conflicts based on that. One additional feature that the role conflicts place has is that you can run this for multiple roles. So now I can come in and I can actually run this for two separate roles, and I can say, hey, what would happen if I assign the accountant and the accounting manager role to one user? What's going to happen from a conflict side? So go ahead and run that. You're going to notice that the number of conflicts increases because we're looking across not only the accountant role, but also the accounting manager role and cross-role conflicts. So now I'm kind of doing that what-if scenario that I can say, hey, what would happen if these roles are assigned to one user? And then finally, we do have some dashboard reports here. We've looked at a couple of them already, but one that I did want to show is this individual role conflicts report. So if you want to see all of the conflicts for each role within your environment that are inherent to each role individually, the individual role conflicts report will give that to you very quickly, and you don't have to go to that role conflicts place and run your conflicts one by one. You can just run this dashboard report, and it'll dump those all out for you in one place. So you can get that output very quickly. So with that, that's kind of the end of the segregation of duties. Frank or Arnold, were there any questions during that segment?
Alex, on the rule set there, you talked about how it's modifiable.
Correct.
Question was about, is it modifiable just by the risk type, high, medium, low, or can you actually add or delete rules as well?
Yeah, so there's two different areas where you can modify those. You can modify the conflict itself. So if we go to like a maintain conflict rule set area, you could come in, you can actually modify the conflict information itself. So you can change the name, description, risk level, the policy, business cycle, whether or not it's enabled or not. You can also change the objects that are a part of that conflict. So every conflict out of the box is going to be between two business processes, but you can actually use this for, if you have a three-way match or four-way match where you have multiple business processes that a user has to be able to perform for that to be a conflict, you can add those as well to the conflict itself. And then you can actually go down to the business process level as well. So if you want to actually change, hey, I need to modify what this maintain bank accounts has in it, we can go down to that level and actually go down and look at the objects that are part of that business process itself. And so then you can actually go in, and so if you have third-party products or an ISV or even a customization that maybe you have a customization that allows you to modify a bank account that isn't part of the standard out-of-the-box D365, you could come in and add that object as part of the business process, and then it would be considered as part of your SOD check as well. So you can get very granular on what you would like to include within your rule set, both from a conflict and a business process perspective.
Okay, excellent. Good. I think that answers that question quite thoroughly. Good. Okay.
Perfect. So yeah, we'll go ahead and jump in. We'll skip around here a little bit. We'll jump into the security designer because those were the three parts that we wanted to make sure we covered today. So the security designer piece is basically where you would come in again and basically be able to modify security from your D365 environment and be able to see what possible segregation of duties conflicts exist because of that. So the security designer is based on what we call security models or simulations, and these allow multiple different either people or even one user to have multiple different security models where they're making changes to security that maybe they want to work on one role or maybe work on one area separate from everybody else. You can kind of use these models as like a quote-unquote sandbox and be able to change security and see what would happen to your, both from a segregation duties perspective and a licensing perspective. So the way to kind of look at this, I went out again today prior to the webinar here and basically created a FastPath Aventico simulation. So now when I go to role, duty, or privilege, I can come underneath the context of that webinar or that security model and basically what happens when you come to this page is it does a live call out to D365 and it pulls back. In this case, we're under the roles, so it's pulling back all the roles within my environment. So it went out and made a live call. It pulled back all of the roles and the duties, privileges, tables, and sub-roles that are assigned to each of those. So for example, this accountant role here, you can see has 168 duties, 2 privileges, 10 tables, and 0 sub-roles. If we actually wanted to go in and modify that in some way, shape, or form, we'd come in and click on the duties, and this will pull up the duties dialog screen where you can actually go through and modify what duties are assigned to this particular role, this accountant role. So you have 3 different tabs up here at the top. You have your all assigned and modified. So all is actually obviously showing me every duty within the environment. So I could go through and search and say, hey, I want to maybe assign this particular duty to this role. And the addition to it is as simple as clicking the active button, right? So now I've made that assignment in that way, shape, or form. You can see that when I clicked on that, the number of assigned increased by 1, so now it's 169. If I want to go to assigned and actually remove a particular duty from this particular role, I can do that as well, just by clicking and deactivating it in that way. So you can very quickly see that now that number is back down to 168 because I removed that, and our modified is increased to 2. So now if I look at the modified, I can see, hey, I've added this duty and I've removed this duty, and I can actually go in and see those changes that I made. So that would, the same screen would look the same for the privileges side. You're just associating the privilege to the role. If we go and look at the tables, it's going to look a little bit different because this is where we actually get down to that object level and we can go in and we can see, okay, I want to actually change the read, create, update, or delete option or access for an individual object. So in this case, if I wanted, for example, to assign read permission to this account in BR, I could go in and I could grant read access to that And again, it's as simple as just selecting that grant from the drop down there. And then you can go through and change the security in any other level as well. But anytime you're dealing with the objects, you're going to be able to get that read, create, update, and delete option for those objects and actually be able to assign those. You'll notice that now that I made those changes at both a duty and a table level, I've marked these as being that yellow bar basically means that they're something in them has been modified and the role itself has been modified. You notice over here on the right-hand side, I can revert all my changes. So if I say, hey, I don't want these changes anymore, I can go ahead and revert those. And at any point, I can come in and I can also add an additional role, duty, or privilege. So if I wanted to start from scratch and create a new role, duty, or privilege, or one of the features that I think gets used the most is we have the ability to clone these. So you can actually take an out-of-the-box role, duty, or privilege, clone it exactly, and actually create a copy of that you can then work with and modify. And so you're able to clone any of these at any point to actually be used going forward. If we go ahead and one more feature I wanted to show down at the privilege level here, if we go into the privilege level, you'll notice that if you click add a privilege, one of the options that it's going to show you here is that you can upload a task recording. So if you do a task recording from within D365 and you go through and you perform a business process, you can take that output of the task recording, actually drag and drop it into FastPath here, and what will happen is that it'll actually create a privilege based on the menu items that are being used in that business or in that task recording, right? So you can very quickly go perform a task within D365, record it using the task recorder functionality, take that output, drag and drop it here, and you have a privilege that allows you to do exactly what that task recording was. So if we jump back to the main screen, if I wanted to see the changes that I made in this particular business process or in this particular security model, if I go ahead and open up the changes dialog, this is actually going to show me all the changes that I made. So we should be able to see that I've added for the accountant, I made a modification to the accountant role. I added this particular duty. I removed this other duty, and I actually made a change to the accountant's table. If I open this up, I can actually see, hey, I went from unset to grant. Right, so I'm able to see a complete overview and see exactly any changes that I made to this security model in that regard. So once I go through and I make my changes, the next step is actually to run the analysis. And this analysis basically does a before and after comparison to show you, hey, here's where your security was before your changes, here's where your security was after your changes, and also from a licensing perspective to show you those changes as well. So I have another simulation that I've already ran that analysis for. So if we go ahead and look at that risk analysis just to kind of show what this looks like, the risk analysis is going to show you all of the changes that were made. So in this case, I removed a number of duties from the accountant role, and I actually removed the conflicts that were existing for that accountant role. So you remember we looked at it earlier, and there were 4 conflicts to it. I removed all of the duties that were actually causing the conflict to exist. So I removed all of those role conflicts from that accountant role. So the risk analysis is basically giving an overview of this, the changes, both from a role and a user's perspective, as well as a role license and user license perspective. If you want to get more information about any of these areas, you can go ahead and click on this. So if I were to open this up and actually sort this here, you're able to see that, hey, the changes that I made actually removed these 4 conflicts from this particular role, right? So that's the 4 that are being removed in that case. So you can see the changes that were made to business processes, to critical access groups or conflicts, both from a role and a user's perspective. And you can do the same thing from a licensing side. So we're able to do a before and after comparison and say, hey, how many activity, operations, and team member licenses did I have prior to the change, and how many do I have after? So you can actually see what these changes would change from both a role license and a user license perspective. Because like we mentioned earlier, when you're making changes, you're not only worried about your segregation and duties that are being generated or removed, but you're also worried about licensing changes that you're making from a security standpoint. So we do both of those from an analysis standpoint when we're looking at the security model. And then finally, once you're ready to actually, once you're satisfied with everything that you made from a change perspective, we have this publish option, which actually goes out and publishes this into D365. So at that point, these changes become live within your Dynamics 365 system. Up until this point, all those changes are just being housed within FastPath, and they're not actually affecting your security. But once you publish those out and they get it pushed into D365, then those changes go live and they actually take effect from that perspective. So with that, Frank, are there any questions around the security designer piece or anything that I covered there?
One question is, does this replace what's in standard D365, or how does it work with it? And I know you sort of covered that, but that last piece you just covered there talked about it does go live. I think one of the differences there, and I'll let you handle in detail, but running simulations and testing it out, trying out security before you hit the go button, if you will. But just review that one more time, make sure it's understood how the two can work together, what this does that D365 does not do.
Right. So for those that have worked with changing security from the user interface in Dynamics 365 for finance and operations, you know that it's a little bit cumbersome, especially from a user experience, to actually go in and try to assign a particular object to a privilege, or to assign a duty or privilege to a role. It's very cumbersome in that regard. So we give you a fresh user interface for that to make that a little bit easier. This does do the same, every functionality that you can do within D365, you can do within FastPath here. You can create and remove roles, duties, or privileges. You can clone roles, duties, and privileges. You can modify your security. The biggest advantage, or one of the advantages you get, as Frank mentioned, is being able to run that analysis and actually see from a segregation duties perspective and a licensing perspective what the changes would be. And the ability to push that security live from FastPath. So if you do make your changes from within D365, the user interface there, you'll know that when you make a change, it doesn't go live right away. You actually have to go and publish that out. We take that step out of the equation from that regard. So I think that I think FastPath does. The security designer does, or very easily could replace D365, and we have clients that are using it to do that exact thing.
Right. Another question there. What is Task Recorder? I know probably there's some folks on the phone that do know what it is, but just to revisit, you mentioned Task Recorder. Remind everyone what a neat tool that can be.
Right. So the Task Recorder is used to be in the old AX 2012. It used to be part of the security development tool, but it basically allows you, and now Microsoft has built it into the actual application, but it allows you to actually go out and just like you would record a video, it actually allows you to record the steps that you're performing within the application. So every time you make a click within the application, it records, hey, you clicked on this button and you actually are performing this task. So it also, from a development standpoint, records all of the menu items that are being used at every step of the way. So you're actually able to see, hey, if user wants to perform, this task, I'm going to need these menu items actually being assigned to the user. And so that's where the security design comes in. If you guys want more information about the Task Recorder, I do have a blog that's completely separate from FastPath. That's just educational, that actually goes over the new features from a security standpoint that Microsoft has in Dynamics 365 from AX 2012, and we can send that link out. It's D360 or D365FOblog.com if you want to use that. I go over the Task Recorder in detail to basically show, hey, here's how you would do it, and here's how you would use that to actually, see what menu items are being used for a particular task.
Cool. All right. I don't see any more questions about that section. Again, this tool is only available for Dynamics 365 for finance and operations currently. All the other tools we covered so far are available for going back to AX 4.0, if not even previous versions. Got about 5 minutes here. I don't see any other questions in the queue right now. Alex, can we briefly show the Audit Trail tool?
Sure. Yep.
We're tracking changes to critical data and the like.
Yep. So Audit Trail is taking the access that we looked at previously and saying, hey, what changes are users actually making with that? And so we have the Audit Trail piece is built on what we call our tracking templates. And so these templates, again, are built by our internal audit team to basically make it a little more user-friendly. And instead of having to know exactly which tables and fields you need to track to actually see changes made to specific operations, we kind of try to make it a little more user-friendly and say, hey, if you're going to track addresses, right, I don't really need to know what table and fields are going to be captured. I can just turn on this tracking template. If I do want to get down into the weeds and actually see what this is actually, tracking, I can definitely do that and then click on the details and open this up and actually see, oh, hey, it's tracking, these fields on this logistics postal address table, right? So you can go down and get down in the weeds if you'd like, but we try to make it as easy as possible. So the Audit Trail is basically you determine what you would like to track, what changes you would like to capture, and then there's a reporting side. So you have the ability to use any of the out-of-the-box reports, or you can come in and actually create your own. You can clone any of the out-of-the-box reports, again, out-of-the-box templates, and then modify them, or you can create your own. So, for example, I've cloned here an address, the address template, and now I can go in and actually make changes. So I can go down to that table and field level and actually determine what event types I want to be capturing. So I'm looking at, what insert, update, or delete events on the actual field at the table level. So you can get very granular on what you would like to track from that perspective. One thing to note, I guess, from the Audit Trail perspective is that our tool uses a separate methodology than like the database log that Microsoft provides. We don't use the database log at all or anything like that. We have our own. We use the Microsoft eventing system that Microsoft is fully developed for Dynamics 365, and we actually listen to events on these individual tables to determine what event types we need to track. So we don't use any of the database log. We don't have to turn that on. To use this, you're setting up your own tracking, and we do all the different reporting from there. So just to kind of show what the reporting for this looks like, all of the audited data for the Audit Trail piece is stored within your D365 environment. It doesn't get pulled within FastPath. That always stays within your environment, and we actually make live calls into these individual systems for that. So, for example, I think I have some data in the vendors here just to kind of show what this looks like. Oops, it's actually customers. I apologize. I'll go ahead and run this. Basically, what I can do is I can go out and run based on these templates. I can say, hey, I want to see all the changes in this case, right? All the changes to vendors and customers that were made within the last 60 days. So in this case, it pulled out all the customer changes. So I can see, for example, here that there was a change on 6/18 at 8:34 a.m. to the terms of payment was updated. I can see the actual customer account, in this case, active transport, the ID, use a customer ID. I can see someone changed the terms of payment from net 30 to net 60, and that change was actually made by myself because I'm the admin. But you can see that it actually will capture the user making that change, and you can see that you can see the company that change occurred in. So you can see it happened within the Contoso Consulting USA company, right? So we're able to show you all that information. We capture all of that just based on the templates you have selected. So at this point in time, that customer template was turned on, and we captured that change as it came across. So that's kind of the idea from a high level of what Audit Trail allows you to do. And we have additional reporting in the D365 side that goes along with that reporting. We have a workspace within D365 you can look at the same type of reports. I know we're butting up right against the time limit here, but just wanted to show what that looks like from an Audit Trail perspective.
Great. Thanks, Alex. I think conceptually folks can understand that you pick out the value you want to track and see what's happening with it and can report on it. You can review changes have been taking place to that and the like, and whether it's critical parameters, master values or fields, if you will, you really decide, and then you build a schedule to review them and how you want to be notified and who reviews when. If you do have any follow-up questions,
Nice to meet you, Arnold.
feel free to reach out to myself or Alex at FastPath, and we will follow up with you. Yeah, Arnold, if you can move me over to presenter real quick here. I think Yeah, I think we're double booked here. So we'll wrap it up. Frank.vukovitz@gofastpath.com. Or Alex, what's your email address?
Meyer, M-E-Y-E-R, and gofastpath.com.
Excellent. Okay. Well, we appreciate everyone's time today. We have recorded this webinar as well. We'll make it available along with the slide deck for all attendees. And thank you for your time, and have a good rest of the day.